So welcome back, everybody. We are now ready to start the second lecture by Professor Boaler, and there will be possibilities for asking questions at the end of this second lecture. Please.
Thank you. So before the break, I asked you to think visually about that mathematics question, and I wanted to share with you now some really interesting, very new brain research about this. So I am working with neuroscientists at Stanford, and we've published together about this. It turns out that when we do a mathematics, even a simple calculation, 5 different areas of the brain are involved, 5 different pathways. And 2 of those pathways are visual pathways, the ventral and the dorsal pathways. And the dorsal visual pathway is the main brain region for representing the knowledge of quantity. So it turns out that if we want to strengthen students' understanding, we need to involve these different areas of the brain. And we want more communication between areas of the brain. As I showed at the beginning, this is what they now know about people with amazing accomplishments, that they have more communication between areas of the brain. But when we only deal with mathematics as numbers, it strengthens one pathway, but it does not encourage this different crossing between brain areas. What encourages brain connections and communication between different areas of the brain is when we see mathematics in different ways, numbers, visuals, words, algorithms. When you looked at that visual, if we'd had time in a maths classroom together, we may have gone on to think about that task with numbers, we may have expressed it algebraically. Thinking about the connection between the visual and the numbers causes a brain pathway to cross. And thinking about that picture with numbers, with an algorithm, with words, this is what causes these different brain connections. So the new understanding of the visual nature of mathematics is very interesting. And a particular one I wanted to share with you. This, to me, is both interesting, but it also made me so aware that there is this research knowledge that's known by scientists that is just not out there in schools and in homes where it should be. So this is very interesting, and it turns out that if I were to ask you to do a calculation now, an area of your brain would light up that is seeing fingers. And the harder the problem I give you to do, the more likely this brain area is to light up that sees fingers. So there are 2 areas of the brain concerned with fingers. One lights up if you use your fingers, and the other lights up when you do mathematical calculations. These are some things that the brain scientists know about fingers. They say that something very important to develop is finger perception. And finger perception is when you know your fingers really well. The test for finger perception is to put your hand under a table or something where you can't see it, and have somebody touch your fingertips and see if you can say which fingers are being touched. So try this with kids, try it with your own children. When I tried it with my youngest, who's only 10, she was better with her right hand than her left. So I realized she was developing her finger perception. But so these are some things the scientists know about finger perception. When you improve your finger perception, your maths achievement goes up. College students' finger perception predicts their scores on calculation tests. And finger perception in grade 1 is a better predictor of maths achievement in grade 2 than test scores. What's amazing about this knowledge about the brain and fingers is that brain scientists have actually known this for a long time. And this quote is very old from a leading brain scientist, Brian Butterworth. And he said, without finger perception and counting, numbers will never have a normal representation in the brain. 1997, he said that. But what happens in schools and classrooms and homes, I don't know if this is similar here in the US, but in the US, people regard finger use as babyish. You see children hiding their fingers if they want to count on fingers. Sometimes students are told they're not allowed to use their fingers. When we stop students using their fingers, it's like halting an area of their mathematical development. So the conclusions of the neuroscientists, interestingly, are that fingers are a really important visual representation. And I talked about linking numbers and visuals. These are some of the most amazing visuals we have. And that fingers should be how you learn arithmetic, they say. Their last recommendation almost made me laugh, because they said schools should have a greater focus on finger discrimination. And until we published this, I didn't know any school that even knew what finger discrimination was. So I wrote an article for The Atlantic. Looks like this. If you Google fingers and The Atlantic, you get an article on Donald Trump. So don't do that. But if you add in math or my name, you'll find this article. And it shares, and there's a lot of press interest. Recently, it was picked up by the Wall Street Journal, by Reader's Digest. They're trying to get out this important knowledge about fingers. And on UCubed, we made some activities for schools that mirror the training that the neuroscientists give on finger perception. Things like this, where students have different dots on their fingers and they play like a scale. This is why musicians have higher maths achievement. So for many years, people have puzzled over this. Is it to do with patterns? Well, partly probably, but it's also to do with their finger perception. Musicians develop very good knowledge of their different fingers. This is another of our activities where kids trace their way through mazes. So when I talk to schools and others and I share that we want to engage kids with maths creatively and visually, I often get this question: what about practice and fluency? We want kids to be fluent, and we want lots of practice. So it's true that practice is important. That is what causes that delicate brain pathway to become a much more firm pathway. But this kind of practice, repeating the same kind of question over and over 30 times, is not good practice. It's not productive practice. And what you can do in what is productive practice is actually to see an idea in different ways, different forms, different representations, which causes those brain connections to happen. So my daughters go to the local school, and when my youngest was in elementary school, I don't think homework is a good idea. I would get rid of homework if it was up to me, but they had better homework at the school. They gave puzzles, but then occasionally my daughter would come home with something like this, 40 questions. This was when she was about 8. And that's the kind of homework that makes kids just crumple, tears often. And so one day I wrote to the teacher. I really don't do this very often with my children's maths teachers, but sometimes I just feel the need. But anyway, she was about 8. She brought home this page of 40 questions. She was upset. So I wrote a little note to the teacher, and I said, I have my daughter do the first few of these questions, and I can see she understands, and I've asked her not to finish the whole worksheet because I don't want her to think this is what math is. Anyway, we had a good conversation, me and the teacher. But she does something different now, and this was a wonderful outcome, actually. And what she does now, instead of given 20 questions like this, she asks students to calculate maybe 2 or 3 of them, and then also to write a story and draw a picture. And so what happens then is, first of all, you don't get kids crumpling and upset with 40 questions to do. They're excited and interested to write a story about the fraction or to draw a picture. You can see an example. It's too faint for you to see. And this is what encourages those brain connections between different areas of the brain, to write about something, to draw it. It really pushes kids to understand what they're doing instead of calculation, which they can often do without understanding. So I came across this guy recently. He sounds kind of Norwegian to me, but He's at UCLA. And he has some really interesting, another sort of brain cognitive scientists, but he talks about how when we learn something, we connect it to other things that we know. And when we retrieve something, like when you are asked a question and you come up with an answer, that information you have in your brain then changes and becomes more retrievable later. So it turns out the act of asking someone a question is very important. He talks about desirable difficulties, where he says you need to, slow down the content and ask a lot more questions of students. He talks also about how important it is to vary the context, the examples, the problem type. But so we have a lot of knowledge now. We want kids having these brain connections. We want them to be engaging in rich questions. And how do we develop that? A lecture it's very hard for students to develop brain connections and brain communication and engage deeply. It can happen. And there are some students who can sit in a lecture and really connect and make deep connections, but it's pretty hard. And we know that at the other end of the scale, there's something that's shown to be very productive for this, which is project-based learning, where students are designing and collaborating and connecting. Hard to do if you haven't learned how to do that, and hard to do if you have a lecture theatre, which like this. But there are many things in between that spectrum that I think are important. And I wanted to go back to this piece of information that this brain cognitive scientist said, which is that retrieving information when you come up with an answer to something is an act of learning. And what he distinguishes between is answering questions as a performance and answering questions as part of a learning environment. So it doesn't help to answer questions in a test. And in fact, there's an Australian researcher, John Hattie, who does very interesting research where he looks at meta-analyses of studies in education to highlight what practice actually has an effect on student learning. These are two of the ones he's looked at and found the impact. Teaching kids to take tests and having kids involved in classroom discussions. One of them, barely any, not even in the desirable range of effect sizes, and the other one, very, very high impact. And I wanted to share, I think there are a lot of classroom teachers who have great discussions with kids. And I'm trying to bring that into the math teaching at Stanford, which you can probably appreciate is a harder goal. But there's this great guy at Stanford, his name is Carl Wyman, and he actually won the Nobel Prize for physics. And he's really passionate about changing from the lecture, because he himself didn't feel he learned anything from lectures. And he compared different ways of teaching physics. And what he did in his model, which I think is very doable for people who teach in lecture theatres, is instead of a lecture, the professors ask students a question. All the students then discuss the question in groups, and then they answer the question electronically, which gives the instructor the immediate feedback on what students have chosen. And then they give like a mini lecture based on what the answers students have given to this particular question. And so what they've found is when they instigate that, the achievement is twice as high for the students. So I thought this was interesting because this combines the two things, the answering a question and also discussion, both of which are really important. I was with Carl last week, and I said, so tell me, when he's got all the physics department at Stanford to change to this. And I said, so do they cover as much content? Do they get through as much content if they're having students stop and discuss everything? And he said, actually, yes. Actually, they get through as much or more, because it is surprising what happens when you take out people deriving formulas on the board and how much time that frees up. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I went to this talk last week at Stanford by a professor from Harvard, and his name is Eric Mazur. I encourage you to look him up. He's a physics professor who teaches at Harvard through project-based learning, and he went through and he describes his transformation from a lecture-based teacher to a project-based teacher. And in his description, which is in one of the Harvard reports, I thought this was really interesting. He said, then I did something I'd never done in my teaching career. This was during a lecture. I said, why? And he said to his class, why don't you discuss it with each other? Immediately, the lecture hall was abuzz as 150 students started talking to each other in one-on-one conversations about the puzzling question. It was complete chaos, he says, but within 3 minutes, they'd figured it out. That was very surprising to me. I'd just spent 10 minutes trying to explain it. And he talks about how students learn so much more from talking to each other, and he's now moved completely onto project-based teaching, so it's very interesting. I mentioned that I've been working with the PISA team at the OECD, and one of the things we did was, in 2012, they collected a lot of extra data on mathematics. And we were able to take the whole data set of 13 million 15-year-olds and analyze their learning styles and how they approach mathematics, and then compare that to achievement. And very interestingly, the kids who fell into this category, memorizers, they believed that their role in mathematics was to memorize, to follow the teacher's methods, were the lowest achieving students across the world. Any country with high proportions of memorizers was a low achieving country, and the lowest achieving students inside each country were also the memorizers. The highest achieving students were those who saw mathematics as a set of different connected ideas, and I published an article on this. It's on our website. It's in Scientific American, about the damage of kids getting the idea that mathematics is about memorization. So I wanted to share with you now something we did at Stanford, where we said to ourselves, what will happen if we just throw all this out and do something really different with kids? And we said, what happens if we change kids' idea that math is not to do with being a math person, but actually we have unlimited potential? What happens if we stop emphasizing speed and instead emphasize depth and the different ways we can see ideas, visualize, explore? And if we, instead of focusing always on correctness, value the struggle that kids go through? So we took all of these ideas and we designed a camp at Stanford. And we invited students in one summer, and the students had we asked school districts, we said to them, can you give us kids who've had bad experiences in math? And they said, oh yes, we can. So we had 81 students. We brought them from low-income homes, and we brought them to Stanford, and they were in 4 different classes. And I was one of the teachers, so was Kathy Williams, who's here with me from Stanford. But on the first day, I went to each of the 4 classes, and I gave a little presentation on brain science, like you've heard today, but 12 minutes, where I told kids there's no such thing as a math person. I showed them the picture of the girl with half a brain. They loved that. They spent the whole summer saying, if that kid with half a brain can do it, I know I can do it. So that was very impactful for them. We told them math isn't about speed, it's about depth and creativity. So what happened? We had the kids for 18 lessons, and we had maths class in the morning, 18 of them, and then in the afternoon, my undergrad class took them in the afternoons and sort of ran around campus doing things with them. But let's have a little look at what happened. These are the pre-test scores of the 81 kids. It's a little faint, but you can see here that each kid has a bar, and this is showing their achievement on a test they took in their district on algebra. So we took students in who were a wide range of achievement levels. Interestingly, on the first day, every single one of those 81 students said to interviewers, I'm not a math person. They could name the one person in their class they thought was a math person, the one who shot their hand up first. There were a range of achievement levels. We put them all together. We didn't put them into different groups, but they all did maths together. 18 days later, we gave them this same test, and this is how they did. So this is really remarkable for an educational intervention. We didn't get to every student, but the average increase was 50% amongst students. That's on a test, which doesn't capture what changed for these students at all, but kind of important for measures. These are the kids making our UCube logo, doing a pretty good job, wearing UCube t-shirts on the last day, making a little UCube sign. And this is just one of the kids in interview. And they said this, at the end. They taught us how math is for everybody. And I believed that I wasn't a math person before, but now I believe that anybody can do math, and that helped me a lot. And the way I thought that math was all about right answers and wrong, but it's really about ideas, and it's very creative. And that helped me like it a lot more. And I share this because there are two things inside here that I wanted us to think about. And it really is both of these two things together that are really important for kids. One of the two things was we changed their ideas. We changed their beliefs from I'm not a math person to anybody can learn math. Mistakes are really productive. But we also changed maths for them. They had been used to maths as worksheets and rules, and we showed them a maths that was open and creative and visual. So we had a filmmaker come into the film all of the teaching I did and Kathy did, and we've actually made that into an online class to train other teachers on how to teach in these ways. But she also made a little film for us capturing the change for the kids, so I thought you'd like to see this. We're going to see, first of all, the students in their regular math, and then what happened when they came to us in camp.
Some people think I'm not good at math. I can never do anything. I'm not good at it. I'm just going to give up.
A lot of people think of it as like prison, like you don't have any freedom.
Okay, time to go to your notebook. Okay, read chapter 1. Okay, here's your worksheet.
The math textbook is kind of like the Bible. You have to kind of worship the textbook, and I don't really like that.
Everybody's going so quickly, and I thought if I didn't go quick, people think I'm like not smart.
I made a lot of mistakes, and I got really sad about it.
You make a mistake, you're pretty much done. Yeah.
I can't do it fast, and they're so smart because they can, and I'm not smart, and I just kind of stopped.
You feel like you're serving a sentence for like nothing.
I love it. That does look like a cuboid.
Oh, we got it!
I've done better with math when I was talking with people, sharing ideas. 4 or 5 brains work better than one.
I'll see it one way, but then someone else will see it another way, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense.
I love that we're getting different answers out because lots of problems in math, there are different answers.
Have more than one way to solve the question. Because in real life, you're not gonna just do one thing. You're gonna do many things. You're gonna need to use different methods.
Yay!
No, hold on. Take your time and just experiment with every way that could possibly work.
You definitely have to be patient because certain problems, they take forever.
Math isn't about speed, and you can make mistakes and you learn from them.
Yeah, I did that too!
Yes!
Told you!
Math isn't like the enemy, and it can't hurt me.
You can run wild, you can pass ideas by each other.
I thought that math was all about right answers and wrong. Now that I believe that math is really about ideas and creativity, it's a lot more inspiring.
So we formed a website a couple of years ago, and we called it U-Cubed. We were really excited when we formed this 2 years ago, where we got about 5,000 teachers coming to the site each month. Now, in our good months, we get 3 million visits to the site. We're pretty international, although it's in English at the moment. Our newsletter goes out to 116,000 people. Those are all the people who've given us their email, so they get newsletters from us. It's opened in over 120 countries. So, yeah, that's good. And actually, I came to London in February, and we sent out a message on YouCubed and said, who wants to come to a workshop in London? And we had 100 teachers come to the workshop from over 15 countries, people from Norway, Sweden. It was very cool. So YouCubed is moving to a new website soon where we're going to have the capacity to kind of click a button and it translates into other languages. So we're working on that at the moment. But pretty much the whole YouCubed team is here. Kathy Williams and I both are the directors of YouCubed. And so we're a little team at Stanford, but we're trying to bring about a math revolution for people. And I have a book which is called Mathematical Mindsets, and it teaches how to teach in these ways, how to teach kids for a growth mindset. Carol Dweck has written the introduction. It's being translated right now into quite a few other languages. It's already out in Swedish. I don't think I have heard about a Norwegian version, but we should do that. And on June 5th, we're opening a new online class. Did anybody here take my previous teacher online class? Yeah, a few of you, that's cool. So I have these online classes. There's one already out there, which has been taken by 60,000 teachers, again, in many different countries. But there's a new one releasing on June 5th. And this one will be a very practical course about how to teach in these ways. It's based on the videos from the camp that you just saw. So like the first session is called, what do we do on the first day of class? What tasks do we use? How do we group kids? What do we say to them? What messages do we give? How do we make maths visual? And then on the day after I get back from Norway, I still have to prepare this, there's a free webinar that's going to give some ideas that are in the course. And if you register for that webinar, then you can watch it any time afterwards. If you don't register before it opens, you don't get to see it. But you don't have to watch it at that time if you want to get in and watch that webinar. But the last thing I wanted to share with you, and then we're going to have time for questions, is we know now from doing this in a lot of schools in the US and other countries that when we change maths for kids, it does more than give them better test scores. It does that. But it also gives them an intellectual empowerment that they take into their lives. And it changes them pretty profoundly. When we interview students, we hear them talk in amazing ways, saying, now I feel open and alive and free, and, quite incredible things that they talk about. And if you don't believe me, come listen to this kid. He's in a new film that's being made that featured a school district I was working with in San Diego, where we got the teachers to shift from kind of worksheet maths to inquiry-based maths, and he went through this shift in his different classes, and good to listen to him, I think.
Math class last year was notes and just handouts, and you were your own little box. You were just boxed in. You were like by yourself. It was every man for themselves. But now this year it's just open. We're a whole big it's like a city. We're all working together to create this new beautiful world. I think the challenges and the future that lies ahead for me, if I keep on pushing, if I keep on doing this, someday I'm gonna make it.
So this shift that he talks about, we want for all kids, and we know that shift can come about. Every summer, we release a week of maths lessons to start the school year. Have anybody done our week of inspirational math? Some of you have. If you haven't, there's already 10 days of lessons on the site. There'll be a new set introduced next month. And it's 5 lessons. Each one starts with a mindset video for kids. That might not be good for you because it's in English, but the lessons themselves are open, visual, creative maths lessons. And we have a lot of data that tell us that kids love them, teachers love them. They're completely planned out for you, and I think pretty usable, even though they're in English. So If you haven't signed up to the website, I encourage you to sign up. It just means you occasionally get news of things that we've released to the site, and come join the maths revolution with us. So I'm going to finish there, and I think we'll have some time for questions.
Please.
Question from our award winner.
I always wanted to ask you, Professor Jo Boaler, why U cubed? What do you mean with U cubed?
Why U cubed? Actually, U cubed came, the name U cubed came when I was having dinner with a friend, and we were saying, what can we call the website? And she was studying fine art and poetry, had lots of nice ideas. But anyway, we decided on U cubed because it's kind of U, but to more powers. Like U to more dimensions. When you get this research and new evidence, it will give you more power and your students. Good question. Other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
When you talk about changing the way people or students learn mathematics, we are used to thinking of three things together. It's the learning process, but also the learning outcomes, so what we should know, and also the assessment. Mm-hmm. So can you change just the teaching method without changing, for instance, the methods of assessment?
That's a good question, and the assessment is really important to change. Now, I would say that you can change teaching even with the standard procedural or not good testing that goes on, and you still see an increase in test performance. Same as with our kids that we had in the camp. They were standardized tests we used with them. But it's very important to change assessment, and it's hard for teachers to teach creative open mathematics if the tests that come in are testing closed procedural mathematics. So any way that assessment can be changed is very important, and that did happen recently in the United States. They've always used very short, closed, multiple choice tests, and now we have computer-based tests that ask for kids reasoning and ask them to visualize and draw, and that's been very helpful in shifting teaching. I don't know what your assessment system is like, but one thing that we need, I mean, if you look at mathematics textbooks, you rarely ever see people asking kids to visualize. There might be textbook visuals, but asking kids to come up with their own visuals is pretty rare, and we need to start bringing that into our assessments.
Thank you.
Yeah, hello.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Hi.
a very interesting presentation. I was very curious about your talk about improved finger perception and higher math achievements. And I was wondering, you know, children today, they use the iPad all the time. Have you seen any research whether you could use, for example, iPad in a positive way for higher math achievements, for example?
I don't think that's really been researched yet, but we're about to start some research on that, actually. And I'm working with a haptics lab at Stanford that makes all sorts of really important medical robotics. And we're actually going to make a device for students to develop finger perception, where they're just using, they can press buttons and things happen on the computer. But we're also going to make an iPad version to see what happens if they do it on an iPad rather than actually press a physical device. But it could be that if you're doing, depending on the activity on the iPad, but there are some things that you do on an iPad that develop finger perception. In fact, my youngest was on a phone the other day on an app where notes float upwards and you're meant to touch them with your finger and you end up playing this, I can't remember the name of the app, it's on my phone, I should look it up. And I looked at it and thought, wow, that is definitely a finger perception development right there. But yeah, it would be interesting to see whether we can develop that on the iPad. What's important about finger perception is that at the moment it only really gets developed very specifically in students who take music classes, and we want it to be much more equitably available to kids than that. So yeah, having other ways that kids are differentiating between their fingers is important.
First, I want to say thanks for your wonderful presentation. I have learned so much. But I have a question. If I understand in right way, you think the new ways teaching can give the children's and they give them so much motivation. But I have a question. If, for example, the Chinese students, doesn't matter. In Norway, in England, in USA, American, they always so good about mathematics. A lot of people talk about this. It's because of their culture. They confuse them and they work very hard for that. So how do you think if we compare the culture, how important, if we compare the importance, the culture and the teaching ways, give the motivation to the students, which one is most important, do you think?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And there are definitely deep cultural differences between countries that impact students mathematically. One of the deep cultural beliefs in the West that's different in the East is the idea that you're born with a maths brain or you're not. That is an idea that I have found to be absent in China, Japan, other high-performing countries. They have different beliefs. They believe that you have to work really hard, and sometimes those beliefs can be very high pressure for kids if, they really put pressure on to work at all hours. But so those beliefs are very different. And in England, for example, teachers believe you have to separate kids from the age of 4 and put them into different ability groups, and that's the only way to teach them. That's a very deeply held cultural belief in England that's very damaging for students. And I think your beliefs here are different around separating kids in those ways. So I think there are lots of cultural beliefs that change. And in China, as an example, the abacus is an interesting tool for finger perception also. So there are different ways of thinking about how early mathematics is introduced. And there was a very interesting study done of elementary teachers in China and the US, which showed that the Chinese teachers had a really conceptual understanding of elementary mathematics that the US teachers did not. The US teachers had a procedural procedural knowledge of maths. So that causes differences in the learning in these different countries. Very hard to look really at international comparisons and really know what is having the impact. Politicians like to say, oh, Singapore is doing well, let's use Singapore math here. It's very much more complicated than that. So it's a good question.
You have a question here?
Yes.
Thank you for your very good presentation. There's one question I like to ask. I just finished my studies as a math teacher, and I have so many great ideas, both from your books and all the students I met and the professors. And but there's quite a shock when you come out on the schools, and you see that. Well, how do you overcome the most common barricade, which is time? The more experienced teachers say that, oh, we have no time for this.
Yeah, time is important.
Because there's so much curriculum we have to get through.
Great question. It's probably the biggest barrier to change, the perception that there is no time to have students go into depth, to do the wonderful things that we heard from Hanan earlier, because we have to get through all this content. So a couple of things about that. One is there should not be so much content, and working to reduce the content that teachers feel they have to teach is an important thing to do. Politicians and others need to hear that we don't want kids going at a surface level through a lot of content. And unfortunately, the way mathematics is presented to teachers, I worry about too. Many countries have lists of standards. Do you have standards here? I think you do, right? Sort of. And unfortunately, what curriculum standards do, we have them in England, we have them in the US, is if you ask any mathematician about why they love maths, they will very often tell you that it's this amazingly connected subject of a few really big, rich ideas that have these beautiful connections between them. And what lists of content standards do, or exercise book chapters, is they cut up all of those connected ideas into little pieces, and teachers are given those little pieces and said, here, teach these 200 little pieces. The connections are gone. Teachers don't see them. The kids don't see them. So we need to move away from presenting mathematics in those ways to teachers and others as standards, as lists of content. But we do know that the schools that are very successful, and I've studied this in different countries, in England and the US, are schools that have still been operating in that same system, but they've said, instead of teaching to all those little separate pieces that we've been given, we're going to work out what are the big ideas. And one group of teachers in the US actually sat together one summer and said, let's change our algebra teaching. What are the big ideas we want students to know? They put out the big ideas. They worked out rich, open activities that targeted those big ideas. And turned out a lot of the small things get picked up if you teach big, rich activities. Their kids did better on standardized tests than the kids who marched through the content piece by piece. They didn't even teach all of the content, and the kids did better on the standardized tests because they taught to these big ideas. And so the kids understood that maths was this connected subject. They felt able to work things out. So, if you are in a situation where you feel you can do that and think, I'm not going to teach all these lists, I'm going to figure out the really big ideas and teach to those. It takes time to reorient in that way, but it's very successful. That is the way we want teaching to be, actually, and I wish we could help teachers by not giving them these lists of content to teach and instead showing them that maths is this interconnected set of ideas. We're actually working on a set of books that are being published now where we've taken every grade level in the US, K-8. We're only at the beginning, but for each grade level we've said, what are the big ideas in this grade level? And then we've selected rich activities that go with each of those big ideas across the grade level to help teachers see math as a subject of big ideas. And our 5th grade book is coming out in the summer. If people want to see that.
Yeah, thank you for the lecture. I would like just to ask this performance or the kind of education that you're providing, it's only for the children? Can it be applicable also for the other people if we want to teach growing people? Should we use the same technique or method, or you do have another opportunity or chance to learn them? Something else.
And you mean adults who are in college?
Not necessarily in college, because we do have a lot of refugees for the time being coming to Europe and Norway, and we start working as well with them in education, especially if they want to go to school or just to take another education in their future. And it's very important for them also, mathematics in Norway. They used to pass the exam and take some 1 or 2 years, 1 to 2 years, I believe so. Can we use the same opportunities for the grown people, the other people, or only the children?
And I think it's, for some grown-ups and adults, it's as or more important to have them experience maths in these ways. And it's interesting to me because I do a lot of work with teachers. A lot of work with elementary teachers in the US, many of whom are math traumatized, have grown up scared of maths, and we teach them and have them experience maths differently as this open, creative subject. We teach them that anybody can learn maths, that many of them have got the idea, somebody's given them the idea they couldn't learn it. And regularly we have adults, grown people in tears, when they experience maths in these ways. Like, they're not tears of unhappiness, they're happy tears, because they see that these connections, and they see that they can experience maths in these ways that they never thought possible. So it's actually, really important for adults, particularly adults who've gone through the system and not been successful. We have worked with adults like that. I was in a group of them just a couple of weeks ago who, all adults, all thought they weren't a math person, all thought math was just a list of procedures. I engaged them in different visual math, and it changes them. And it changes them as people when they see maths in these ways. So I think it's very important for adults. I teach students at Stanford, and as undergrads at Stanford, they come into my class. It's a class called How to Learn Math. And I get this interesting different populations of students come in. I get many math traumatized undergrads. You might think Stanford doesn't have math traumatized undergrads, but it does, many of them. And so I get these math traumatized undergrads who want to figure out what happened. And then I get math majors and engineers who love math, and they just wanted more of it. So I have this group of adults who are quite different from each other. And we learn over the course of the quarter the things I've talked to you about, and we do maths together every week. And these kids at Stanford have spent their whole lives getting A's in their maths classes and in other classes. And sometimes they come to Stanford and they really struggle for the first time, and many of them fall apart in those moments of struggle. But anyway, so they come to my class and they learn differently. And I say to them, when we work on a maths problem together for the first time, I say, I'm not impressed by speed. In fact, I am unimpressed by speed. And if people work quickly, that tells me they're not thinking deeply. So I'm not looking for speed. What I want to see is creative representations of your ideas. So week one, the students don't know what a creative representation of a mathematical idea is. They are the ultimate procedural thinkers that have come through the school system. By week 10, these students never want to go back. They see maths completely differently. They come up with the most amazing ways of seeing it. They want to go out and tell others about it. So absolutely, you can do this with college students, Stanford students, adults who've been unsuccessful. I think it's important for everyone.
I was just wondering if you could give me an example of...
Where are you? Oh, there you are.
Example of what you mean by this big idea behind the curriculum for a...
So our summer school students that we taught for 18 days, that was how we planned our 18 days. We said, what big ideas do we want students to focus on? So one of the big ideas was number sense. We knew that these kids, even though they're in 7th and 8th grade, would not have a good number sense understanding. So we said we want that to be highlighted. And then we wanted the kids to think algebraically. But we didn't want them to see algebra as an endpoint, that you solve for x and find something. We wanted them to see it as a problem-solving tool. So we taught the kids to generalize. That was one of our big ideas. We wanted them to think generally and to generalize. We wanted them to develop number sense. We wanted them to see maths as patterns. That was another of our big ideas. So yeah, those are kind of examples of bigger concepts that might pull up in our teaching of generalizing. The kids learned lots of algebraic things that could be listed under a set of standards, but we were going for sort of a bigger goal. I think we're, maybe take one more question. I don't know about your time, but I know we're over time a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can give one example of such ideas as she asked for.
Yeah.
That can save much time. We traditionally teach about speed, density, foreign currency, and so on, as if they were totally different and unconnected subjects. And we use very much time. instead we can get people to grasp the idea of proportionality. When one number is a product of two others, given two of them, find the third one.
Yeah.
Then we can save very, very much time.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's a great example of a big idea, also proportion, that threads through a lot of mathematics. Are we okay?
Yep, we're okay. Okay, so then let's give Professor Boaler a hand.